This is Anthony Nathaniel back here at Lower Education Zone, and today I'll be teaching us on classification of things, of living things, and I'll be brushing off some few summary about the cell. So now without wasting much time, let's delve into the bulk of the work. Now, so classification of living things basically has to do with the fact that every living thing we see, and living things are basically things that have life, right? So everything we see in life, they have their names, they have their specific identification, and those identification they are called nomenclature. So now, nomenclature is spelled Nomenclature. So nomenclature simply means about the fact that each of these organisms, we have specific names to call them. And an early scientist known as Carl Linnaeus, or whose name was also turned to Carolus Linnaeus, he was among the first scientists to classify living organisms. He classified plants in 1553, and then 1753. Then he classified animals in 1758, and some of these classifications are still used till today. An example of that is the binomial system of classification. But before we deal with that, let's go into the different ways animals can be classified. Now, classification of living things. We can classify living organisms into different groups, and those groups, they vary depending on their size and the number of animals or living organisms that are there. So, and when I say animals are just a part of living organisms, because living organisms include plants and animals. So let's move on. Now, that classification, we have kingdoms, we have phylum or division, we have class, we have order, we have genus, kingdom, phylum, class, order, we have family, we have genus, and we have species. So it's in order of the increase, in order of decreasing animals in the groups. So the first kingdom has the greatest number of animals, and it also simultaneously has the fewest number of similarities between those animals. So if you say living organisms are in the same kingdom, that means they are all members of that kingdom. So, and then after kingdom we have phylum. If you say living organisms are members of the phylum, in that phylum there are different organisms, and you might need to know that in a kingdom there can be different phylums. For examples, in kingdom Animalia, I will come to that, but kingdom Animalia is the kingdom that all animals belong to. So that kingdom Animalia, we have phylum Porifera, phylum Chordata, phylum Echinodermata, and all the rest. So now let's move on. And after kingdom we have phylum, then after phylum we have classes. So, and also phylums consist of different classes, and then those same classes consist of different subclasses. We have subclasses. Then after subclasses we have orders. Yes, after orders we have family. After families we have genus, and that genus is kind of one of the smallest classification. But then we have species. Species by far the smallest. So the animals in a species, they are often having the same characteristics, and they are very similar to each other. For example, you and me watching this video, we belong to the same species, and the name of that species is sapiens, and the name of our genus as human beings is Homo. So whenever you have an organism, they are often named in two different ways. So, and that is called binomial, because bi means two. So, and then when you name organisms, you take the genus name and then the species name. So those two names, they are underlined or put in italics. Either you underline them or you put them in italics. That's how you often see them in biology. So no, we don't use the kingdom, we don't use the phylum, we don't use the class, we don't use the order, because there are too many animals there. So we are looking for a specialized class or group of animals. That's how we often make use of the species, because they are specialized. Then we have the genus after the species. So the reason why we make use of the genus is because we want them to have, like, just like you have name and surname. So that's why most time when you see people have two names, name and surname. So that's same thing with living organisms. They always have name and surname. So their specific names is their species, while their surname it is their genus. For example, human beings, we are called Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens. And this Homo, it is the name of our genus. Our genus belongs to the genus Homo. So and then this sapiens, it is our species name. So far humans are the only species in sapiens. In that sapiens, and the reason why they are the only ones is that sapiens, the living organisms that characterize the sapiens species, they are often the same throughout. If you see a rabbit and another rabbit, those two organisms, they belong to the same species. But a monkey and an ape, they might belong to the same genus, but they won't belong to the same species. So no two different type of animals can have the same species. So even if, no matter how similar they are, for example, you often have dog family, cat family, big cats. And when we talk about big cats, talk about lions, we talk about cheetahs and all the rest. So and those big cats, if you are a enthusiastic viewer of Nagiwide, you would have known that those big cats, they all have whiskers and they have claws. So and then apart from that, those big cats, even though they are big cats, each of them has its own special similarities, and those special similarities are called species. That is the species that the animals belong to. So and then we have, after classification of living things, we have different classes of living things. So and then let me talk about kingdoms. There are different kingdoms, and those kingdoms, they are the biggest groups of living things. So scientists, they now said, okay, instead of classifying organisms into just animals and plants, there are some animals, there are some other organisms that do not, they are too diverse. They are too diverse from these animals and plants, so they should belong somewhere else. So that's why we often talk about the fungi and then the monerans and protists. So apart from plants and animals, we have plants, then we have animals. But apart from that, we also have what's known as the monerans. We have the protists. Then we have the fungi. Then this plant is spelled Plants. I know you are familiar with that. Then animals, Animals. Monerans, Monerans. Protists, Protists. Then fungi, Fungi. So just in case you can't see the word, that's why I'm spelling those out. So and these are the 5 kingdoms that scientists and biologists have been able to classify every living organism into. And these 5 kingdoms, they have their different properties. For example, let me start from the simplest. The simplest living organisms, they are called monerans. And these monerans, they include your bacteria. You would have heard of bacteria before. And bacteria, they are often notorious for causing illnesses and diseases in human beings. But I must add that bacteria also have their own beneficial um, effect on human beings and other animals. So and then we have under these monerans, they are often single-celled. They are always single-celled, and those single cells, they are very, very simple. And what I mean by simple is that in the previous video I talked about the fact that every cell has a membrane, right? And that membrane is the covering of the cell, and even the nucleus of a cell often has a membrane. But in these monerans, their cells, even though they have cells, their cells do not have membranes. So they are very simple that they don't have membranes. And these cells, they often exhibit asexual means of reproduction. You know that every living organism has to grow and multiply. The reason why you still see lions, the reason why you still see chickens is because those chickens, they mate and they lay eggs, and those eggs raise other organisms to be their offspring, and so on and so forth. That is how living organisms reproduce. So these monerans, the reason why they still exist today is because they reproduce, and most of them reproduce by what is called asexual reproduction. And I'll talk about that in a separate video. But today, let's move on. So example of those monerans are your bacteria, your nostoc. Example of those bacteria are algae, and algae include the nostoc, Oscillateria, and Anabina. So these are often green-like substances that they are algae, and they often live in water and ponds and all the rest. So they are just all those green particles, all those green substances you see on your still water. Then we also have protists. Then your protists, they are also very simple, but they are not as simple as the monerans. And these protists, they have their membranes, and their cells are eukaryotic. So these protists, their cells have membranes, and their cells are more complex than the moneran cells. These moneran cells, their cells are too simple, so they are called prokaryotic cells. But for the protists, their cells are not so simple, so they are called eukaryotic cells. So if you want to know more about that, you can also check out the internet for more on this. But in your secondary school, you won't be asked to do much of that. But you should know that in prokaryotic cells, they do not have membranes, while in eukaryotic cells, they have membranes. So, and it's spelled eukaryotic, eukaryotic, then prokaryotic, procaryotic, prokaryotic. And then let's move to your fungi. And then your fungi, they were often taught as plants because they often have they often grow on the soil. Most of them, just like your rhizopus. Rhizopus is a fungus that stays in the roots of beans plants and other leguminous plants. But then in later years, scientists have discovered that this fungus, they do not have cell walls made of cellulose. So their cell walls are often made of chitin, and that chitin is basically a substance that is more like a supporting system in insects. So insects also have their exoskeletons made of chitin. We'll be moving to that in another video. But moving on, fungi, they are a separate kingdom, and they exhibit their own um, peculiar characteristics. Then we have the plants. Then your plants, they are very common, right? Your beans, your maize, your everything that has leaves, right? Because those are your plants. So you have to be careful when classifying plants, because some of those things that look like plants, they are not plants. For example, I mentioned earlier that fungi are not plants, and those fungi, they can look like plants, but most of them are not plants. So then we have animals. Animals are everything you say, like your goat, cheetah, and then these animals, they are divided into different sections. We have the protists. We have those protists. They include organisms like sponges. Those of you who watch Nigeria, you would have seen all these immotile organisms that look like branches. So those are sponges, and they are often like sponges. So now then we have coelenterate, and then coelenterate, they are like your jellyfish. We have um we have they are mostly, there are actually many different classifications. So polyphera, yes, polyphera is another one that looks like polyphera. Yes, we talk about polyphera. We talk about sponges. We have platyhelminths. Platyhelminths are like flatworms. So those flatworms, they often reside in the gut of human beings and other animals. So flatworms include tapeworm, planaria, and so on and so forth. Then we have nematodes. Nematodes are like your roundworms, as ascaris and guinea worm, all the rest, filaria worm, and all the rest. So and then we have arachnids. We have annelids like earthworms. We have mollusks. We have echinoderms. Those are the organisms like your starfish. So those are echinoderms. And then we have chordates. And those chordates, that is where we organisms, we human beings belong. And those chordates, we'll be talking specially about them in biology because they have their what is called the notochord. So those chordates, they have the notochord, and another sub part of those chordates, they often have what is called the vertebrate, the vertebra. So and the vertebra is like your backbone. So any organism that has a backbone, just like your human being, your lizard, your newt, frog has a backbone. So those are all chordates. And then chordates, they are divided into chordates are divided into your species of fishes, your amphibians, your reptiles, um, your aves or your birds, and then your mammals. And we human beings are specifically mammals. And today, for today's video, I basically talked about the genus and the species of human beings, which is Homo sapiens. So basically, that is basically what you'll be covering on the classification of living things. Though you can also go into in depth on the classification of these living things. For example, the plants, they are subclassified into thallophytes, bryophytes, and trachophytes. So and then those subclassifications, they are often known as divisions. So divisions of plants is thallophytes, bryophytes, and trachophytes. So and then when we talk about those divisions, we still go down again to classes. Then we have the order, we have family, we have genus. Then finally we have the species. So those species, they have the most similarity among them. So today we'll talk about the classification of living things. So I intended going over cells, but I'll do that in another video. But then in summary, we'll talk about the fact that living organisms were classified by early scientists, and those early scientists, they came up with what is called the binomial system of classification. And this involves the process whereby living organisms have two names. So, and then for example, we humans, we are called, our binomial name is called Homo sapiens, and then we have two names, and I liken that to just like having a name and a surname. So our name, our personal names is sapiens, while we belong to the genus Homo. So and so on and so forth. So each living organism you see in your environment, on the soil, on the wall, in the floor, anything in the water, those organisms, whether they move or not, they all have their binomial names. And then we'll talk about the kingdoms of different organisms. We have the minerals, protists, fungi, plants, and animals. Then we also talked about the fact that animals are subdivided into porifera, coelenterate, sponges, platyhelminths, and so on and so forth. Then we'll talk about plants divided into pteridophytes, bryophytes, and trachophytes, which are also the divisions of plants. Then monerans, we also have their subdivisions. We have protists subdivisions, we have fungi subdivisions. And I also reminded you that fungi, they are not necessarily plants. So fungi, they might look like plants, just like the rhizopods, but they are not plants. And before we go, let me give you a classic example of fungus. And the example of fungus you have known is that thing that they often put in your pizza. So, and that is called your mushroom. So your mushroom basically looks like it has a head. It's also known as the pileus. Then we have the gain and stipe, and so on and so forth. So the pileus is mostly in these parts. Pileus. We have the gain. We have the stipe. So that is the rounding up of this video on classification of living things. For more information and education, you can check the description of this video. I have my